So good morning. Thank you for having me here. I'd like to begin with gratitude. There's a lot to be grateful to in coming here, and certainly especially to the students and the dean. But today I'd like to mostly thank Professor Smith and Mysore, not only because we're talking about women's issues, but because the dynamism and the grace that you brought to the school event. And also, you have these students who are following all of us guests around. They're getting us back and forth to the downtown hotel, the Ibis. They're sort of shuttling us around. They're giving us tea. They're talking to us about your educational system and following me around and helping me. But the shadow behind the shadows has been Professor Smith and Mysore throughout. We know who's moving things around, so I do appreciate that very much. And I appreciate. And it's funny, as Smith was saying, you don't have to talk about gender. You can just talk about your work, and we'll take it from there. I'm going to talk because I'm an academic. I'm a professor. In my history, I started with a history degree undergraduate, and then did a professional master's degree in architecture, and then did a PhD in architecture and urbanism. And in between, worked in video games and worked for a firm called. So I've done a number of things. I was a construction manager actually for high-end residential before I did any architecture school. So I have the experience of being on site and having interesting chats with electricians. I've been there. So I'm going to talk in two ways. One would be, I'm going to run through very quickly some statistics. I'm talking about the North American context. I'm from the US, but I've been in Canada for almost 3 years. So I'm going to give you some quick graphs so you see what the layout in education and the profession is for architects. And then I'm going to talk a bit more anecdotally about, some sort of ideas that I might have about gender equity in the we have very many young women who pursue an education. We do have a sense that young people are so fluid and so much more accepting than things maybe were when we were in school. But then a lot of them fall out and disappear from the profession. And I think we really have to assess that there's a real play back and forth between when we talk about fluidity and tolerance, which I think may be easier in India. I'm not sure, but I feel like our culture in North America is a bit more basic, it's a bit more primitive, and it's a bit more dualistic, maybe. So what I show you may seem, just very naive. It will seem very small when I show you the number of schools we have in our statistics. But on the other hand, I think that's really just women's work. And so if we approach everything with tolerance, that's one side of gender equity. The other side is saying a sort of hard no to a lot of things that feel fluid. For instance, when people say, as they said to me, I've been in charge of diversity committees and equity committees at all of the colleges I've worked at. And I remember a faculty member in Louisiana, we were talking actually about race rather than gender, which in the American South is a real issue. And I had a forum on diversity, and one of our senior faculty said, well, Catherine, we had the 60s, and we had the civil rights movement. Because we're all equal. And I pointed out that our population in that town in Louisiana was 51% African. African American, and that our student base was 8% African American. Therefore, you can't just be tolerant and kick back and say, well, I love my brothers and sisters equally. There actually have to be structures, systems, arguments in place, because by being loving towards each other, we get part of the way, but we certainly. So with that, moving forward, it's nice actually that we are a small group because we can have a chat briefly. So, students, this will probably be a different answer than when I get back home. But do you have any sense? We'll start with women. You can think of your mentors or with yourselves of any sort of characteristics that you'd say are sort of naturally more feminine or that women are more apt to have in terms of work or personality. Nisha says detail oriented. So women tend to be detail oriented. That's a good one. Do we have any other feminine characteristics? Women explain more about things. That's different in North America. Okay, that's a good one. Okay, talk more and explain more. That's helpful. Women are helpful, I would say. Okay. That female students or women students or people who identify as women are better at. More sensitive. You're just going to make your male colleagues angry now, but okay, more sensitive. Okay, so that's a few. So sensitive and detail oriented and explaining. Okay, how about men? We can speak freely. I won't tell anyone. Any capabilities, qualities? We'll stick to positive qualities. Design capabilities, whatever you like. Broad vision. More radical solutions, broad vision. Okay. Anything else? Okay, broad vision. Well, that includes a lot. I think we'll ask the gentlemen this afternoon, we'll ask them why there aren't any women on their panel. And we'll ask them why they get the afternoon slots so that all the students who slept in are going to show up for their panel. We'll ask that question. So I'm going from the North American and as a stereotype, being observant, responsive, and systemic. And one might say observing meaning that you watch and pay attention to things. Listening often comes into that too. And I'd argue that in part it's because of typical gender roles that children had in households, which we didn't have in my household, which may be why I'm a professor, that my dad taught me to cut wood and shoot animals that invaded our garden, as well as, I was expected to clean and cook and whatever. But I think in the cleaning, cooking, and whatever, the things that a mother often has, assistance, at least watching things moving around you, and you're responding to other people. You're seeing that your father has just dropped his shoes and you're moving his shoes. You're doing whatever, which does mean that you have to pay a bit of attention. So perhaps that detail orientation, that you're seeing a lot at once, which can also be systemic, that you are predicting what will happen next. You're wondering what your brother might do next and whether you will be cleaning it up shortly. You try to prevent that accident. In the North American context also, I would say in the blue, coded for men, active, individualistic, and constructive. And actually in talking with Mr. Reddy, we could say that sport is one area that's wonderful. Come in different sports for young men and women. But the idea that men would be active, you would be more apt to be off doing something on your own. We have a lot of lawns in North America. The boy children mow the lawn. You get to ride this big tractor. You're by yourself. It's very individualistic. This is the sort of upbringing. And that you're expected to be more protective and so more active, that you would protect your sisters, etc. What we find in classes, and I'm part of a committee that's to teach teachers at the university level how to create more inclusive classrooms where everybody feels comfortable participating, no matter their background or their gender. an American context. And I don't mean this to, well, it's not you, we're talking about these ignorant North Americans, is that a lot of male students will speak in a class without really wondering if they know the answer. They may dominate airtime so that women explain that actually surprised me a bit, in that women also in design studio as well may have really brilliant ideas, but that they wait a minute. You know, they're a bit more observant and a bit more slow about responding. So in terms of class management, how we tell professors to operate is that you really have to identify those systems as they play out, and you actually have to try to bring out and engage, whether men or women, they're men, so that they can participate equally, because you are almost, I mean, you're all adults, even in undergrad, but you're adults in formation, and you don't yet know all your capabilities, and if we don't allow you to show them, then we are not doing our job, and you can't be included, whether because of your language background or gender. So I'm hoping, I think we'll find out later, we have such a powerful panel of strong women that I'm assuming in your context, none of this is true, and that everybody sort of expects the same of men and women, because we've all accomplished so much. But I say, when we expect these qualities, it does get very binding. And I would argue in the end that for professors and for the encouragement of other students, that experimentation, and I mean experimentation intellectually, but also in terms of trying on different roles, like, do I like to speak in class? Maybe I don't. But I think the university is a really great place for that. But also, as you move into the field, your mentorship should really help you to continue to experiment and to try skills that might not be the first thing that's easy, but that might help you to grow. Walk away from them. That's okay. So we'll run through these quickly, but this is the North American context. So we have apparently far fewer than you percentage-wise of women in schools. So only about 40%, 2 in 5, are women in our architecture schools in North America. They graduate roughly equally. NCAR, which is being a registered architect, applicants are still roughly the same. But then when we get to working architects, we've got only about 25%. Licensed architects, so you can stamp a drawing, you take the full liability for that work. Much smaller again, down to 3 in 20, because often our firms will have 1 or 2 people who are licensed and have a stamp, and then everyone else who's a working architect just works for them, and they take ownership of the drawings. When we get to academia, and I'm talking from the academic context about being a professor for many years, deans of schools, we've got 20%, 25% lecturers, and then architecture prizes, we know, go largely to men, in part because of the big firm phenomenon, which we see at that panel this afternoon. So these statistics are all for women, so women only. Again, moving from the top where we have all the students, the bottom, the black line, is award winners, and the red line is working architects. So what we know is that, we only end up with 25% women, and this is not moving all that quickly, to be honest. It should be moving much faster than it is. This one, it probably went around the world, I'm not sure, but the Venturi-Denise Scott Brown conflict over the Pritzker a few years ago made this very present. I had the honor, because I was actually at UPenn at that time, to drag Denise Scott Brown to an interview session and to meet Bob Venturi and see their house. But she was a prominent part of their practice, and yet an award went to her partner, Bob Venturi. And I think at this point, what the Pritzker means in the future is sort of open to debate, but gender equity may be a greater part. So this moves from the left, 1993, up to 2015, and the black line is women, the green line is total men. And we see that it's getting closer. So things are moving closer together. They're closer together again. Green is men, pink is women. The right side's graduate, the left is undergrad. So it's closer at the graduate level. People are moving into that arena in terms of the degrees. In terms of the degree correlation of all of the data, where we have medal prize winners at the top and we have population at the bottom, where 50% of everyone is women, a very small, like 2% of AIA gold medals, and architecture employment somewhere in between. This is where you will probably not be that amazed, but maybe at how few schools we have. In the pie charts, the black and bigger number is always the number. It's a sheer number, it's not a percentage. So in the west coast of the US, there are 25 men and 15 women as deans, directors, heads, or chairs. That is only 25 schools for all of California, Utah, Nevada, all of that. And the main thing to take away from this is not just that North America doesn't have a big population, but that there are far fewer women in leadership at schools, which does make a difference in what happens in those schools. And this is moving forward. It just shows that between the two dates, that not very much has actually changed. I'm now teaching in Canada. Canada, the red part at the top, that whole nation of Canada has about 38 million people. It's a vast land area, but almost no people, to be honest with you. I'm from the capital of Canada, Ottawa. I'm not from there, but I'm teaching there. And they're not even at 1 million people yet for the capital of the nation, which is why we only have 11 schools of architecture and 9 female heads. Of course, in Canada, you'll notice the numbers far more equal, 9 women, 10 men. In part, Canada has federal government actually runs a lot more of how the education system works, and it regulates things like hiring policies. If we're hiring a new faculty member at my school, first priority has to go to women, second to men, and actually Indigenous women, people who are native to Canada, trump everyone. So if you are an Indigenous woman with a PhD, nobody can beat you at a job interview. When I've been on hiring committees, we know that if we put a woman with a PhD on our short list of candidates next to a man with a PhD, we really aren't going to hire that man. We can't. And I would actually argue that structurally, that seems to be necessary, because what we've seen is that things aren't actually catching up that quickly. They aren't moving that fast. And that sort of mentorship and leadership makes a huge difference. Professors, this slide is about age. At the bottom is full-time, full professors. And the blue line is men, and the purple line is women. So we see, if we've got 600 male faculty, that only 200 at that highest level are women. When we get to the top, which is my level, we see that it's a bit closer, 200 to 400, or 50% of faculty are women. I would argue that is mostly the result of age. People who are full faculty are from a different generation at a time where there just weren't as many women in the field participating. So that hopefully will creep forward through hiring practices and whatnot. So, exclamation point, times are changing, but change takes work. And even though I titled this Women's Work, it doesn't really work if it isn't everybody, is the main point. Family, friends, teachers, mentors, and employers need to encourage a variety of roles and skills for girls and boys, women and men. And the thing that I think about so often actually is how, at least in North America, I don't know, this might sound anti-feminist, but I think men actually have a bit of a harder time in picking different roles. Like at this point, we've accepted women can do everything. We're brilliant, we're wonderful, we just need a chance. I think we can all agree to that, right? But I think if a young man says to his family that he wants to go into a field that is more traditionally female, it's actually a bit harder. And also for men to embrace different parts of their personality that may be more coded as female. Like, actually, at least in North America, which is it's very binary, I think, more binary perhaps than here, there is a sense of difficulty there. And I think that causes a problem, not just because men don't, you end up with a lot of men in these traditional roles that like they're just not good at, and they're angry about, and they're terrible to everyone, and they probably should have done something else. And if they would step aside and go into nursing or child care or anything else, they might be happier and there'd be more jobs for women. In my PhD cohort, where often women and men, everybody's academics and trying to raise children, two of my cohort, which is the people who went through my PhD at the same time, the woman got a better academic job and the man became a stay-at-home father for young children, like age 1 and 2. All of them have two families, both have 2 girls. Both dads have been fantastic stay-at-home dads. They teach part-time. They're the best mothers I've ever seen. They're also diligent on Facebook. Each new outfit is up on Facebook. And I think actually having that flexibility where men could stay at home to support their partners, because so often, I'm interested to hear how these women have come so far, but so often women end up actually doing all the jobs, which isn't really fair. If they're trying to do all of the things in the home and childcare and be dynamic and wonderful, because their husband happens to be male, I mean, it just doesn't make that much sense. And I think that's the sort of next step in moving forward. This is back to this rules that bind and limit everyone. And I think this is why we have a great hope to stop doing this, is architects, you couldn't pick a side of this if you're going to be an architect. There's just not a legitimate way that you can do your Corbusian manifestos. I mean, manifesto could be like a male style of communication. Eileen Gray has written wonderfully on E1027, and it's a conversation, but that's a dumb stereotype. And Le Corbusier was sensitive, at least in residential work, which is why he was a great architect. He wasn't because of the pilotis, So if we move to architecture, since you're working with so many systems, climates, environmental factors, economic factors, cultural factors, you better be observant, responsive, and systemic. There's just no way around that. Or you're probably not going to be a great architect. You might be a sort of draftsperson in a firm. On the other hand, since nobody needs an architect, I don't know how it works in India, but what's the percentage? Does anyone in North America is like 10% of built work is architected? Mostly it's just engineers who are building. To imagine something that isn't yet, to imagine something otherwise, to imagine something better. There's no reason you build something unless you thought it would be better than the thing not being there. Well, sometimes for money. I'm looking at, I don't know. Some of us are schizophrenic, so there are moments where you question, like, why am I building this? But you're building for a client. Your client wants to watch TV on the ceiling. I love that project yesterday. It's so great. But you have to be able to strike out and imagine and be active. You have to be constructive. So you have to be all the sides of this imaginative field, which is why I think architecture hopefully will move more quickly. I'm ashamed that it hasn't. So I do want to finish up, and this is more anecdotal. We talked about family and gender roles. I think that's a barrier that changes generationally. I was lucky to have parents that were basically hippies, which is why I would chop wood or do hockey and also do sewing, because they just said, do what you want, be free, be happy, which was a big hippie thing in the 70s, 60s. But it actually worked out that you figure out what you want to do. My brother is much better with children than I am. That's the way he is. I'm absolutely fine with that. Which goes on to friends. Accept each other and love your differences, especially women. I found when my friends started having kids and I started doing PhDs and whatnot, it took a bit of negotiation. And you may find this as architecture students with no time, no sleep, and you talk to your friends who may be having children living at home, that actually you have to find ways to support each other or else things don't work out that well. I think that's hard to remember and hard to do. And women are also, I'm trying to not be gender binary, but women can be really mean, I think, to each other and critical. And I think not doing that is really important. And then, as I said before, supporting some experimentation and moving it out into peer support. And studios are so great for that, where students, you can realize a student has great potential. I've been trying to hire students this week to work for me from afar, and I've had men interviewing them, and I'm looking at their portfolios, and the men have said things like, well, this female student, I don't know if she'll take criticism well. And I know the student, I've taught her twice, she's very clear, she's very confident, she's from Mauritius, she's like on point, and I think these men who are interviewing her are worried, and I think sometimes men get worried about women being angry at them, or about, I've had elderly studio critics who are worried about making young women cry, so they don't give them clear feedback. And it's radically unfair to not actually allow women to be strong, and maybe even argumentative. So I'm obviously hiring the woman from Mauritius. It's my research lab. Mentors, fostering growth. This goes to men and women, and accepting frictions. That's what I mean. Like, you may have a difficult time, but your role is to help these young men and women embrace parts of themselves and roles that may be new to them. That's the whole point of mentorship. I said, don't be creepy, because we've had a lot of the Me Too movement in the US, and the US is less formal. So there are times when I think genders are closer together in work and it's a little more fluid. And I can certainly say that I've had arguments with male friends who say things like, well, I don't see why I can't say to someone at work, hey, you look great in that skirt, because I would love it if that woman said to me, hey, you look great in those pants. And I've tried to explain to them, and I think this doesn't apply to your context because everyone I've met has been so polite and kind and appropriate. But I think in the US, people are a bit more informal and inappropriate. But like, if your boss or somebody says something about your personal appearance or your skirt to you, like, actually, even as a man, picture your male boss saying to you at the end of the day, hey, you look great in those pants. It is actually the same feeling. It's one of massive inappropriateness. It's not a gendered thing. It's actually a power thing in a workspace. It's just radically creepy to be doing that. And I think that's where the generations are kind of figuring out a little better. And we've talked about this, rules that support fairness, fair not being equal. So again, with my research lab this week, I already have 2 guys working for me. I'm hiring one other guy, and the guys doing the interviews said, hey, this guy is great. And I said, I'm not having 4 guys working for me. If there's no woman candidate, we're keeping it open. It's garbage, because I know there are great women candidates, so that's what we're doing. And I'd say that's the sort of, it's not the same as equal necessarily, because if I was equal, I'd just wait for the applicants there. Fair means I need more women working for me. I know they're there. And sometimes they don't apply as confidently. So we have to actually seek them out. And then the hiring policies means you have to be more aggressive. You have to fight systems that are just sort of hanging around in a weird way. in part because men are largely in charge of these systems still. You actually have to go out of your way to recruit and hire women and ethnically diverse candidates, and you have to get in schools funding for diversity. Very often we have to get scholarships for that. So that's about where I'm at. The only thing I would add is, for the youth, women, I do this very often. It could be that we feel like we're right. I will accept jobs or do jobs because I know I will do them better than other people. I'll just say it's faster, I'll do it myself. But if you're always doing, very often, the organizing, the observing, the Professor Mysore, if you're always doing that, you don't have any time for your writing, your creative work, your designs, because you are running around while some male student or male coworker who's proven that they're not paying attention. The boss will say, well, he's not as detail-oriented. Why doesn't he do the rendering? And you'll do the door schedule because I know you're going to pick up all the doors. If you're a real junior at a firm, you can't say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. But you can say, here's what I'm interested in. It might not be my strength, but this is what I want to do. And I think for more senior people, and I'm working on it, and maybe Professor Mysore is, you have to say no to things even if you would be fantastic at them, just to make more space for the other work. And you have to let people screw up. It's very hard to hand out work and say, go on, do your best. It might not be fantastic. I'm going to let you do it, which I don't know if that's a gendered thing, but I certainly have a hard time letting go of projects. Being flexible and forgiving your elders. I actually did have a senior elder make that comment to me about the skirt. He said, are you going to wear that skirt to our next meeting? He was 80. He's from Scotland. He was very valuable and had been a great teacher for 5 years. I said, again, this is where you can say no to things. I said, please don't ever say anything like that to me again, period. But I didn't cut him out of my life. I accepted in a sort of forgiveness that this person is a bit ignorant. It's not his fault. He's right. He was born in 1935, I think. Right? What does he know? Probably a good deal, which is why I didn't kick him out of my life. He's a very good person. Obviously, in other situations, you might have to go and complain if people are actually getting in the way of you doing your work or having your education. Yeah, that has to be stopped. And not to be afraid of developing skills and abilities that you want but don't have, and that goes to men and women. So I'm hoping if that's the fluidity in this, is that experimenting and taking directions that might be a bit of a surprise, even for your family and friends, whether it's a job skill or any other direction. That's the things, as people move around, there's a philosopher I've been trying to read lately, who talks about with more freedom, there's automatically more diversity. Because as soon as people start to select for the different sorts of roles and skills and jobs they want, everyone sort of shuffles around and it becomes more diverse because the opportunities are open for the people who can best do those roles. Okay, well, thank you very much.